In today's segment of In the Legal Know, we're going to uncover some Medicaid myths that your family needs to be aware of. Medicaid is so complicated. There are Medicaid transfer penalty rules and look-back rules, and these rules can have a major impact on families who are planning for long-term care or trying to help a loved one qualify for Medicaid benefits. And joining me now, of course, to sort this all out and understand the rules is attorney Vincent J. Russo. Vincent, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure to be here once again. And you are so right. These rules are so complicated. So myth number one, right off the top, Medicare is the healthcare safety net for seniors, but it does not cover long-term care. Medicaid is the only government program that'll do that. And that's why it's so important we're talking about this today.
Yeah, so is exactly like because Medicaid is so important, so because for long-term care, right? Or
yeah, it's important because seniors need care at home or care in a nursing home. Care is so expensive, and so they don't have the resources to privately pay. And so that's really the important element here is that we want to take care of our seniors. They need to be able to access Medicaid. If they have assets in their name, then we got to get into these rules.
Okay, so let's talk about the rules when a person wants to try to apply for Medicaid and then they do have these assets in their names.
Sure. The first rule we want to talk about is the look-back rule. And so let's pull up a slide here. So when someone applies for Medicaid for nursing home care, the Medicaid will look back to see what you did with your monies, your financial activities. They look back 5 years. That's the critical time frame. And they look in particular for transfers that were uncompensated, gifts, for example. And if they see them, then they assess a penalty. So you got to keep records. Don't throw out your records. You got to have 5 years of records, and timing becomes very important.
Yeah, so why do families need to really be aware of this, when it comes to planning for long-term care?
Yeah, so it's important that families and the senior in particular, the older adult, thinks about the what-ifs in life. And what if they need long-term care? How are they going to be able to manage? Are they going to be able to stay at home? Are they going to be able to cover the cost of care? And so you need to understand the 5-year look-back rule, because you should be considering planning well in advance. But even in a crisis, there's still planning that can be done.
Yeah, and then we're talking about also transfers and stuff, right. And you kind of almost like you want to put your money somewhere and protect it, before you need to, have to have that decision to put someone in long-term care. But there could be penalties, and that could delay coverage if you don't do it the right way, right?
That's exactly right. So rule number 2, there's the look-back rule, and then what happens if they see these transfers? Then there's a penalty. And what's the penalty? The penalty is that you'll have a waiting period before you can access Medicaid. And you're going to have to privately pay, or if you're lucky, you'll have long-term care insurance to cover that penalty period. So transfers that aren't compensated trigger a penalty. How do they calculate the penalty? It depends on how much you give away and where you live. So it can get complicated now. So for example, in New York City, if you transfer $15,282, it's a 1-month penalty. But in Florida, it's $10,645. So it can really vary where you live as to how long the penalty is. So if you unfortunately are trapped in a crisis and you've made transfers during that 5-year period that are uncompensated, it may render you ineligible for nursing home care for a number of months.
Okay, so common transfers are like...
Yeah, let's talk about the common transfers. So first, let's talk about cash gifts. So someone their daughter's going to have a wedding, and they're going to give the daughter $20,000 to pay for the wedding. That's an uncompensated transfer. Or just cash gifts to help a grandchild or another family member. Those can be problematic. Transfers of a home. You add your child's name onto the deed. That's an uncompensated transfer. Creates a problem. Undocumented loans. A child says, I have a problem with my finances. I can't pay my mortgage. So the parent lends the child money. It's not documented. That's a problem. Or the child comes in and helps take care of the parent. Maybe they give up their job and they're getting paid in effect by the parent, but it's not documented in the right way. It creates a problem.
Wow, it's a lot going on right there. So if Medicaid decides, oh, there was a transfer, now it's subject to some sort of penalty. I know you kind of touched upon it, but how do they calculate those penalties?
Okay, so the calculation again is Medicaid looks at what's the average regional rate for a nursing home in that area where you live, and they come up with a number, roughly $15,000, for example, in New York City. And so for every amount that's transferred uncompensated, it's divided by that regional rate, and it tells you how many months you're ineligible. So it really creates a problem. But there are so many exceptions to the rules.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Are there exceptions, that maybe you won't get penalized?
Yeah, absolutely. And so transfers between spouses are an exception to the transfer penalty rule. And in New York, for example, we have spousal refusal that allows immediate eligibility. Transfers of the home to certain individuals are exempt. So a transfer to a caregiver child who lives in the house at least 2 years, not subject to a penalty. Transfer to a child who's disabled, not subject to a penalty. And then transfers to certain trusts. A child who's disabled, then money can be put in a trust for them without a penalty. So lots of exceptions. Also, rules will vary state by state. So in New York, for example, right now there's no transfer penalty rule for home care services. So even if you're stuck in that 5-year look back, it'll affect nursing home care in New York, but not home care.
So you really have to prepare in advance. So somebody who's actually watching this and, eventually you're worried about future long-term care, what should they do?
First of all, I would say you got to see an elder law attorney and pull together your financial information. Make sure you keep your records. Sit down with the attorney, understand your financial situation, what you can afford to do, and what steps you should consider taking to protect your assets. Because without your assets, how are you going to afford to live?
Yeah.
You need your assets and your income.
Yeah, and I told you before, I said when we were putting my grandma in a nursing home, we realized the look back, when we're trying to get her that long-term care, and that was when my parents said, ooh, we need to think about this and put everything in a trust. So,
That's right. It affects so many people.
Yeah, it does.
Everyone that we talk to, someone has a family member that's impacted in this way. Last thought.
Yes.
It's never too late.
Okay.
Even if you're in crisis, don't assume then you have to just spend all your money down and access Medicaid after that. Steps can be taken to protect assets.
And you know what? You're a great person to call, vjrussolaw.com, right? Yep. You're an expert. Thank you for always walking us through this. We appreciate your time always, Vincent. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. See you next week.
All right, we'll be here again next week.